In this video we are revisiting the Mk6 Escort. Regular viewers may remember many years ago I drove a convertible in the rain, had a fairly miserable time, hated on the car from the very start. I'm going to try and be a bit more open-minded today, and there's a very good reason for that.
Because I love them. It was a car that just came at a very difficult time in life, and it was our little saviour, and I have so much respect for these cars.
Now, this isn't actually the first time we've seen this car. We saw it at the Cardigan Classic Car Show and someone got all emotional about it then. But we're nowhere near Cardigan. We're actually in England, Wiltshire. And we finally caught up with the car to do a test drive on it. So huge thanks to Gavin for letting us drive this beautiful car and for bringing it all the way to Cardigan for the Classic Car Show. This is a very early Mk6 Escort. It gets a bit confusing with Escorts. They launched a Mk5 in 1990. It was not very well received, I'm going to say. So Ford set about steadily improving it. There was a facelift that introduced these rear lights that I think are absolutely revolting.
Oh, I think they're gorgeous.
No, Mk5 just got a much cleaner rear style to it.
I feel that's how this video is going to go.
Yeah, I'm not too sure about that. They had to move the rear wiper as well. The rear wiper pivoted more centrally on the Mk5, but then they realised if they fitted a spoiler, the wiper would have to move. So they did that. And in 1995, the year this car was built, they changed the front end styling. So it's still fundamentally a Mk5 Escort, but we've now got one-piece headlamps, the oval style grille, very much the Ford design language at the time. This one unfortunately has been dinged on the bonnet, which is a bit of a shame because otherwise the condition is amazing. This car has done 25,000 miles from new. In its first 15 years of life, it did 1,000 miles. Madness. Under the bonnet of this one, we have the 1.8 turbo diesel engine. And this is an engine with quite an old history. It was introduced as the Lynx engine in the 1980s, 1.6 form, powering the Fiesta and the Mark III Escort. It was not a good engine. It was very down on power, and I remember my aunt driving me around in a van version. It had a 5-speed gearbox. It couldn't really pull fifth. I thought it just didn't have the power. They enlarged it to 1.8 litres, but importantly, this one has turbocharging and an intercooler, and that boosts power significantly. You see how air is scooped in through the radiator grille into the liner here and then down into the intercooler, a bit like Peugeot's XUD. And that means this has 90 brake horsepower, the same as the turbocharged XUD. And Peugeot really is probably the major comparison here. The XUD engine regarded as one of the finest diesel engines of its time. Good old mechanical pump, very simple, hugely robust, and in 90 brake horsepower form, quite potent as well. So it'll be interesting to see how this compares. Same power output, does it behave the same? Just before I open the boot, one thing that signifies this as a Mk6 is the badge is here. I think on the Mk5 it was over here. But open the boot and we get to one of the better points of this range of Escorts. It's a good sized boot, folding rear seat as well. The suspension turrets take some space, but not actually very much. And I think if I check out the floor, or is it underslung? There's got to be a spare here somewhere. Here we go. Oh wow, we've got the original build paperwork in here still.
Oh wow.
It's amazingly preserved. And I wonder if that could even be an original tyre. Maybe not. It looks like it might have had a puncture at some point. But look at the state of the floor. These cars did rot, which doesn't make them unusual. Vauxhall Astras rotted, Peugeot 306s rotted in horrible ways you couldn't even see until the rear seatbelts pulled out of the bodywork. So not that unusual, but that is why a lot of these cars haven't survived. Another reason is the Ford Focus. Let's climb aboard and see how the interior looks. Plasticky. Please excuse the little dog who is a bit bored and a bit warm. We'll get underway in a minute, Diego, don't you stress.
So it's really interesting to note that the Mk6 was marketed as being significantly different than the Mk5, and one of the things that they commented on was a move away from 90s plastic.
Yeah, and there's still an absolute sea of it. I think there's a slightly more organic shape, if you like. I bet that's what they used in meetings. Slightly more curvature. Some of the switchgear changed. I just don't know why the switchgear needs to be that large. And I think I said that in the original video. Very clear, concise dials. The needles are quite elegant. Nice little elegant clock as well. And this specification, we've got a remote boot release, we've got electric windows, we've got a tilt slide sunroof as well, so it's not too badly equipped for an LX.
Not the original stereo, but he does have the original stereo.
He does have the original stereo.
So
5-speed gearbox, but just look how clean it is. Look at the steering wheel, still got all the grain on it because it just hasn't seen any use.
Yeah.
Indicator stalks are quite nasty. I don't like the feel of them, but that's also true of stuff like the Ford Puma and the Fiesta at this time. Fundamentally great cars, let down by switchgear feel a bit. Maybe I'm just being too picky. But the Ford Focus came along in 1998, only a few years after this car was built. And that was the leap forward that Ford needed to get back on top of competitors like the Peugeot 306, the Citroën ZX, and the Mark III and Mark IV Astra.
But there was an overlap, wasn't there?
There was a considerable overlap.
2002, I think.
One of the reasons was the Escort was produced at Halewood near Liverpool, as well as many other factories, Salois amongst them. But they kept on building them at Halewood while they waited for the Jaguar X-Type to come on stream. So it's said that the very last Escorts are very well built indeed, because they're built almost to Jaguar standards. But I have to say in this one that everything feels, I mean the plastics are a bit nasty if you do that, but don't do that and then it's fine.
Why would you do that?
But it all feels well built. You shut the door, it's a reassuring clunk and bits of trim don't fall off. So that is good times. But we'll fire up the engine, which is very, you can tell it's a diesel. Wait for the glow plug light. It sort of shudders into life. But to be fair, as good as an XUD is, there's no getting away from the fact the XUD is a diesel. You know about it. Once you're underway, these engines tend to smooth out. But yeah, on idle, they're a little on the rough side. We will do a windscreen wiper test before we hurtle off. Oh, apparently I've got to wipe myself. That's a bit... Whoa, there we go. And there just isn't quite an overlap here, which leaves us with a tiny triangle of doom and the inevitable dribble of disappointment. That is a feature of these. They oddly just didn't quite overlap. We got much worse on the Ford Focus, of course. For all Richard Parry Jones' skills in chassis development, whoever was behind the wipers of the Mark 1 Mondeo and the Mark 1 Focus should have been given their marching orders. Turning circle is apparently not very good, so we'll get to experience some mild reversing, which gives us an opportunity, I suppose, to operate the rear washer. Oh, we get program wash wipe on the back. Weird. And that wiper is very much set up for left-hand drive. That is, yeah, not the best performance.
Diego agrees.
Yeah, Diego also hating on the wiping performance. But what I like, it's a very old school diesel, and that's a good thing in some ways and bad in others. The bad is that it's a bit turbo laggy. The good is you can do stuff like that, potter along second gear, no speed at all. But if I put my foot down now, there's the power. It takes till almost 3,000 revs for the turbo to get into gear and do its thing. And again, Peugeot's XUD, a little quicker, around 2,000 revs, but still quite laggy and quite hard to keep on boost. So it requires a certain driving style that you don't need in the petrols. And to be honest, petrol probably the way to go with an Escort. The Z-Tech engines that came in, even while the Mark V was still in production, offered a much better driving experience, I think. Good zingy little engines. The ride and handling, the ride is a little disappointing. I think others, especially the Peugeot 306, were considerably ahead in terms of ride comfort. This gets a bit jiggly. It doesn't like broken surfaces at all. Here is one. Oh, it's noisy, it's uncomfortable. But the steering, power assisted, is absolutely lovely actually. And then we'll just not bother with fourth. Once you get the turbo spinning, the torque is very plentiful, and that makes it quite relaxing. You don't have to rev it. Although I will say the gearing isn't the tallest. I think at motorway speeds you'd probably be getting on for 3,000 revs, which is a bit much. But again, diesels of this time, very different to more modern turbo diesels, where they really have them pottering around at like 2,000 revs at motorway speeds. Yeah, it does steer well, it turns in really nicely actually, but it still does feel like Ford was always chasing the game with the Escort Mark 5 and 6. They were never ahead of the competition at any point. It always felt like they were struggling to keep up, which is why the Focus, when it came out, was such a revelation, because suddenly Ford were on top of the game, and I think that's a position they've largely managed to maintain since. Oh yeah, so now we're into the meat of the torque. And you're down the road very nicely. I seem to recall that when they did some through the gear acceleration tests, there were some of the tests where this was quicker than a Cosworth. I think that probably tells you more about the turbo lag on a Cosworth than anything else. But yeah, it's very pleasant, very composed, apart from over the worst surfaces. This feels like there isn't quite enough suspension travel almost. Yeah, this car covered so few miles in those early years because it was kept for best. One of those older types, generations before, who would have a car for best. So this won't have been thrashed up and down many motorways in its life, and has managed to stay in absolutely lovely condition.
No, it looks like it may have only done 1,000 miles with its first owner.
Yeah.
And I think the world of our cars have to be very grateful to the little old men and little old ladies for keeping these cars.
It somehow avoided the fate of becoming a cheap banger. It was stashed away for 8 years of life and didn't move at all. It was just carefully garaged, and that has helped preserve it in this exceptional
I believe
condition.
it was stashed for 18 years.
18 years?
Yes, it's stashed away for 8 because whatever unfortunately happened to the first owner happened, and then his next door neighbour bought it.
Ah, I see.
So she hasn't been out much.
No, hasn't seen a lot of use. 25,000 miles, as I say. We won't go too far today because it would feel like the wrong thing to do in such a lovely low mileage car. But yeah, for all that it's off the pace of its competitors, it is fundamentally a good car. Ford did get there in the end, and it's just a shame that they were so off the pace to start with the Mark 5. Again, the Mark 5 isn't a terrible car, but it wasn't the move forward from the Mark 4 that it really should have been. It had the same engines, but was heavier. The handling was quite poor. They didn't fit anti-roll bars to the lower spec models. So much momentum was lost early on. And like I said, there was a string of improvements with the Mark 5 Escorts to try and catch up with the competition. I think Ford basically just got a bit lazy and thought, oh, we know how to do things, and yeah, ultimately paid the price for that. But the 1.8 turbo diesel was a good engine because this was a boom time for diesels. Those Peugeot XUDs had opened up diesels to many more people, and everyone thought, oh yeah, this is a bit of what I want. Because you get such better economy. You're probably talking 45, 50 mpg, which the petrols at the time couldn't get anywhere near. So yeah, I may have been wrong all those years ago when I drove a cabriolet in the rain. Maybe the Mark 6 does deserve a lot more respect.
You can't see this, but I'm grinning behind the camera.
I bet people can sense it.
sense while I'm grinning.
So a fun fact is that the Mk6 Escort actually lasted until 2002 in van form. I think hatchback sales were phased out in about 2000, but the Transit Connect wasn't yet ready, so Ford kept the van in production till 2002, by which time it was looking quite old-fashioned. But oh yeah, there we go. Once you get that turbo spooled, it does pick up nicely. This is the same power as the Citroen BX TZD, which was basically a GTI diesel. So a bit of a wolf in sheep's clothing here, I think, to have that sort of power in a car that looks like the one that Grandad used to go and get his Werther's originals, which the first owner probably did, to be fair.
So as we're stuck behind a herd of cows, I'll tell you why this car is so important to me. So my friend gave us our Mk6 Ford Escort P43 YPD, and I was either pregnant or not long had my daughter Cleo, and we're very poor and we couldn't afford a car, so it was like a little saving grace. And I either brought one or both of my children home in a Mk6 Ford Escort. I don't know why they don't like them. It's rude. So they came home in a Mk6 Ford Escort. I went on honeymoon in a Mk6 Ford Escort, and actually I was in labour in a Mk6 Ford Escort, very much in labour, because I remember hanging off the Jesus handles. So it feels really lovely to be in this car, because that car was amazing. Did run on chip fat a lot of the time.
Yeah, that's something I forgot to mention actually, that being an old school engine, you can do that.
Yeah, it did run on chip fat a lot of the time, and in the end her engine was still willing, but the bodywork gave in. So
often the case.
Sadly, that was the end of her. I believe her engine went into a boat. I wonder if it's still going.
Could well be. Actually, just before you cut off, talking of these engines, my dad used to work for someone who had a Mondeo with this engine. It did 330,000 miles before the crankshaft snapped.
Blimey.
Which I don't think is bad going at all.
Yeah, I think these get a really bad rep, and I appreciate there were bad ones, but ours was fantastic. We had no issue with it. It was brilliant.
Well, there we have it, the Mk6 Escort. Actually, quite a lot better than I'd probably give it credit for. There are some limitations with the ride and the smoothness of the engine at idle. Like I say, compared to rivals at the time, not so bad. And I think actually the interior is nicer than a Mark III Golf. I'm going to get in trouble for saying that as well. Don't think it's nicer than a Mark IV though, which is why the game was moving on. But yeah, I've enjoyed this very much. So thank you very much for watching. We'll see you in a future video. Farewell. Imagine being on a driving lesson and this is what you're having to deal with. Herd of cows down the road.
Doing a very sterling job.
Yeah, yeah, the cows are going, ooh, this grass looks nice.
The cows are not.
Might eat this hedge. Yeah.
But the learner driver is, so well done.